No.
That's correct.
Anything.
I can just provide an overview, and I believe Mr. Medlars is here to assist if council have questions. But we have 3 items of old business. They all relate to a group of applications that were considered by County Council at the April 26 public hearings, where council deferred action on the applications for receipt of further information. And then if council may remember that on May 24th, County Council closed the public record on all 3 applications. The first application is change of zone number 1967, filed on behalf of Henlopen Properties LLC. Council may recall that this was a change of zone application from the AR1 zoning district to an MR district for a parcel of land of approximately 43.77 acres, more or less, located on the southeast side of Kings Highway, which is Route 9, and on the north side of Gills Neck Road, which is Sussex County Route 267. So this is one of the 3. So.
Shall we read all 3 of these at one time, Mr. Moore? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, you can read all 3 of them. You can go ahead.
Sure, yep. Yeah. The second item of old business is change of zone number 1968, also filed on behalf of Henlopen Properties LLC. This is a change of zone application from the AR1 agricultural residential district to a C2 medium commercial district for a parcel of land of approximately 3.041 acres, more or less. And then the third item of old business, Mr. President, is conditional use number 2334, also filed on behalf of Henlopen Properties LLC, which is an ordinance to grant a conditional use of land in an MR medium density residential district for multi-family units, which is 267 units, to be located on a parcel of land of approximately 43.77 acres, more or less, located at the same address.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore, if I'm going to have a couple things to say, that you can say something you want to. I asked that it's put back on the agenda for one purpose. We got documentation from the applicant and from Lewis Board of Public Works about water runoff, wells, that kind of stuff. I read both sides of it, and I will say I'm not an engineer, probably, or a math person, and I didn't stay at Holiday Inn. So I asked our county engineer, Mr. Medlars, to review both documents and simply bring to us his view on, because I thought there were some things that were not quite the same in what I read, his view on what maybe could be ways to improve, any concerns, any issues, that kind of stuff, that the council could hear that. Somewhere there's a document he's got, I'm sure somebody's got it, that we're going to get the document and let him explain and go through that. There's no action today to be taken. We're going to take his information, we're going to review it, listen to it. There's no public comment. This is not part of the public hearing. This is only commenting on those 2 items and what was in the public record. Nothing beyond that. So, yeah, Schaefer, you have a question?
I may have dozed off there. Hans is going to make a presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And just before you start speaking, I just want to make sure that what's being discussed is only getting a staff report based on things that are currently in the record. So anything that you're discussing is not new information that you're bringing in because the record's closed. Correct. It is only helping the council understand those items that were submitted by both the applicant and by the Board of Public Works in their reports so that they can analyze those. Very good.
Good afternoon, Mr. President,
afternoon,
council members. I'm going to make a comment to the reference document.
Okay.
We can pass them down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just yeah, that's fine.
Pass them?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Mr. Bradbury, what do we got there?
So first of all, you've known me for almost 7 years, and you know I'm not a big man of PowerPoints. So, I do like to put things in engineering terms, precise comments, chronological order. So in addition to what our county attorney said about the record, and that is very true, the review of the record, but also of the public documents referenced in the record. So, for example, the regulations, the stormwater regulations are referenced in the record. There's a number of studies which are referenced in the record. Other people, like the comments from the 2 consulting firms, speak to these various documents, so I went back to them and looked at that as well. So in addition, several of the agencies are referenced, that they have certain regulatory requirements. So I did speak with a representative of the Conservation District, and I did speak with a representative of DNRC who is in that field and has knowledge of the underlying events. So that sort of sets it up. And clearly, as I said in my first sentence, it's not that the county engineer woke up one day. No, I did receive a phone call from the president asking me to perform the review. So in this, just to give you a little bit perspective historically, Chapter 89 is not a very frequent piece of legislation which gets evoked in these hearings. So in my tenure here, I've had 4 of these. One of them required the Technical Advisory Committee to be convened, which is another sublayer under the Chapter 89. So that gives you sort of perspective how often this is used. Now, give you another piece of perspective, normally when we review these, and these are the past 4, they don't rise to the nature of a critical single point of failure asset. These are assets which fall in the wellhead protection or the recharge area, which are either one of multiple assets or not a critical asset for the utility involved. So that gives you the perspective of how I look at these things when I do these reviews. And again, this is not performed by my staff. All these reviews, the 89 reviews, come to the county engineer. So that sort of tees it up, what we did and what we have done. The next one is on the DNRC side. We have an ordinance which uses a mapping system created by the Department of Natural Resources. And that mapping system is subject to review. They review it themselves. Sometimes it's requested by other entities, like the Lewis Board of Public Works has requested it. But I also know the City of Dover requested it. There's contamination in the City of Dover. They made requests. So these maps are a living and breathing animal. When you look at the underlying documents in the record, they speak to how many years of travel should be analyzed. How big should the analytical zone be? What should be the withdrawals? Should we be used current withdrawals, future withdrawals, past withdrawals, averages? All this, in order to come up with the maps, falls within the Department of DNRC. And this exact same thing is true for the legacy landfills where we have jurisdiction over. We do not use our own mapping. We use our consultant's mapping, which is reviewed by DNRC when we come up with the groundwater management zones, which are part of the county code. Different chapter, but same process in how to come up with a mapping. So having said this, obviously, from both the studies performed by the various consultants, that this particular parcel is in part in the groundwater recharge zone and is in the wellhead protection zone. So there is not a dispute on that. So that's clear. And I'd like to now start with, I looked at the 2 aspects. When you look at the analysis you have to review, there is the recharge component, and then there is the quality protection component. So, and both of these are to be treated slightly differently. The recharge component actually has a prescribed in the code requirement of a water balance budget. And that particular one was performed by the consultants working for the applicant and reviewed by the consultant working for the utility. Now, I looked at both of these, and I think there's not much discrepancy in the sense that the initial budget supports that there's sufficient recharge. There was an original report which dates back to February where there was a deficiency. That was corrected, and I think everybody's on board that the recharge is adequate. However, there's a couple of components you have to consider. That is based on analytical assumptions based on soils, not like the code requires, and that's not our code, that's the 5101 DNRC code for stormwater requires a verification of the infiltration rate post-construction, and it has to be 150%. And that was one of the questions I asked. Does this project clearly fall within the new code, which was passed in 19, which requires that post-construction verification? The answer is yes and yes. So everybody knows that that is a requirement. So the budget, as it was prepared, has to be confirmed, and it has to be confirmed at the 150% level. So I am relatively confident that.
What do you mean budget? I'm sorry, I miss something?
There's if you go to 89, there's actually something which is called the climatic water budget. That is a requirement to be submitted under the 89 review, the chapter 89.
What's the budget? That's what the cost of the
It has nothing to do with money. It has to do everything with water quantity recharged.
So it's a water
It's the
budget.
amount of the water budgeted to that. Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
Ms. Jennings did not review it.
They said there would be an additional, like, million or 1.5 million gallons put into the soil, more than would have gone in naturally if the construction didn't take place.
That is correct.
And so you're saying that's accurate?
That is accurate based on the initial water budget, non-monetary.
So that is true. There's going to be actually more water going into the ground.
No. Once we build the facility and do the post-construction verification testing, we can answer that question in the affirmative.
Yeah, but analytically, you think that might be pretty accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
no,
So I
remember the water budget is not based on actual tests.
understand you're going to do the test after you build it.
It is.
It seems like it probably will be.
I would expect, based on the infiltration rates I know, I expect it to be correct. Now, there's a caveat to this, and infiltration basins are notoriously difficult to build because of soil compaction, et cetera. There's already a number of requirements in the 5101 regulations, but I added a suggestion later on to make sure that to have some higher level of inspection during construction prior to this testing. And I'm saying this for one reason only, so both parties can comfortably come to this conclusion. We will meet the recharge rate. Now, when you look at the B&L report, they were talking about also slightly changing the area where the infiltration occurs. When you look at the boundary lines, and I looked at the proposed subdivision layout, the infiltration facilities as they exist today, if you happen to have been out there, I'm sure Mr. Schaefer's been out there, the facility as it exists today will be filled in. The proposed facilities are located closer to the well fields. So in my opinion, where the boundary falls today, these infiltration facilities will most likely contribute to the recharge. More so than the existing facility as it exists today, which lies partially on the divide. So, and that's the tricky thing. And I asked that question point blank to the Sussex Conservation District representative. I said, have you seen the proposed plans? She said, yes. And I said, is my assumption correct that the existing facility will be abandoned? And she said, yes. So that does not happen very often. So that's an unusual twist in this whole thing, but that sort of leads me to believe that the budget as presented, water budget, will in the end prove out to be equal or greater to than the required 150%. So recharge is one issue. I feel relatively comfortable on the recharge with proper precaution during construction.
So not to overcompact the soil and whatnot.
That would be a good thing.
Right.
Because in the end, both parties are interested in maintaining the recharge as it
And that's
exists.
a routine requirement today.
That is part of this is a routine requirement today. And there is independent inspection already written in the code, but I was suggesting that we use a geotechnical expert to do this versus somebody who just has a blue card. And there's an educational difference. It is not it's more like I want to make sure that somebody who really understands soils looks at it versus somebody who understands stormwater management. That's on the recharge side. The quality side is much more complex. And there were several issues raised by both parties, which is interesting. Like the one thing both parties agree that the code, the regulation as they exist today, if you have rooftops which have the runoff potential for contaminants which are other than like normal rainfall, and it really comes down to your HVAC system and how you run your cooling towers, how you run your heat exchange units, etc. These are supposed to be run through a natural remediation, whether this is initially both parties said bioswales, and one party said, I looked up in the regs, both bioswales as well as ephemeral wetlands are accepted practices in that world. So both of these would work, and initially the report of the applicant, the initial one, that was the April one, spoke to the bioswales, and later on there was a reduction in the recommendation to it has to be
When you're doing that, can I ask you a question? You said temporary wetlands?
I said ephemeral wetlands.
So how do you build that?
An ephemeral wetland is something you essentially create and you plant appropriately with the correct plants. So that is a biological forebay which exists versus just one with riprap in it.
Okay.
So these are both of these are right out of the regulations. So that is not something the county engineer came up with. I looked at the two recommendations. I looked at the April version and the B&L one, and at that point they seem to be both honing in on this, and I believe that is a very good recommendation, and we should stick with the either or, either the bioswales or the ephemeral.
Should that eat up more real estate than a bioswale?
A ephemeral eats up actually less real estate than a bioswale, so it has nothing to do. Both of these fulfill that function. So I think the two, when you really boil it down to the two consultants at the April level agree, only the May level has a deviation, and I sort of wanted to point that out. So,
and neither one of those are implemented in the plan as it was submitted today?
The plan has not been submitted.
Okay.
So, we're talking at a planning level.
Okay.
But I do know from the Conservation District that the existing system is to be abandoned, which, that sort of is an unusual step, because otherwise we could just take the existing system. But that's not part of the review here. So when you look at the second one, and that is, everything speaks to, the entire record speaks to runoff of impervious surfaces subject to vehicular traffic. Now there's always the contamination potential. And when you normally look at this and you're not within a recharge area, you would look at the comments which were written in one of the reviews by Verdantes, which says you have an unconfined soil layer, and if, worst case scenario, if something happens and there's a major spill, then you just dig up that soil layer and you remediate after the fact. In a critical single point of failure asset, in the county engineer's opinion, that's not an option. So when you look at the previous reports, the B&L report from the utility speaks to central filtration. The Verdantes report in the same subject matter speaks to separation. And these are similar issues. Like anybody who's ever seen a big fire company, there's an all-water separator, they're sized for certain sizes, versus a sand filter unit. So this is really, and that's where it comes down to, what do you prefer? If you have, but one of them should be required. One of them should be incorporated into the system design. Now, there was a step back on the Verdanta site because their initial report speaks to separation. Their later report speaks to essentially that unconfined layer being now the line of defense. Now, I disagree with that, and I put that in my recommendations. So when you look at the separation, when you do separation, you have to size it for something other than what we in the engineering world call first flush. First flush is when you have enough rainfall for the sheet flow to be enacted, the sheet flow to be collected in the stormwater basins, and you have enough, yes, Councilman.
Separation is you're separating the contaminant from the water.
It is most commonly used in oil-water separators. So if you go to a filtration type system, which is a first flush system, you're dealing with less of a volume. If you're dealing with a separation, you have to size it for a completely different storm, because at this point, the first flush brought in all the oils and all the contaminants.
Did the applicant offer something such as that?
The applicant offered that initially and then backtracked it
Oh. Since when?
in the May,
This is the May report.
the May version.
Okay, well, I missed that somehow.
I did too.
I actually read it a couple times.
So the initial April version had the word separators. As a matter of fact, it referenced 2 chamber separators. In order for this to really work, and if you go back to the literature, a 3-chamber separator is recommended.
How big are they?
You would size it what we call the design storm. So they can get pretty large, because normally when you install them in a fire company bay or you install them in a car wash,
Well, it's similar to a septic tank, right? I mean,
on
multi-compartment septic tank, right?
steroids, Commissioner.
Right, it's just bigger.
A lot bigger.
It's a
That's
precast
what I'm wondering how
structure.
big.
It's a
the
precast
fire-
structure. And the reason is, when you're dealing with a confined flow, whether that's a wash bay, a garage bay, you know you only have the volume you're dealing with, a much, much smaller volume. If you're dealing with a design storm on a parking lot, you can imagine how big the unit has to be. And I can fully appreciate why the comments change, from how they were originally phrased versus how the end phrasing was.
Right,
That's
so
why
that's off the table now, is that right? They're not doing it?
I'm not speaking to what's on the table, off the table. I'm just trying to come up with when I look at it, I believe the preferred protection, if I had to protect it against petroleum contamination, I would prefer a controlled first flush, smaller flow with a sand filtration component versus a much larger flow and a separation component. So when you look at my suggestions in the back, that's why I sort of honed in on this, and I specifically used, and it truly is an engineering term, first flush, versus trying to size something for a design storm.
So with the sand filter, the contaminants break down over time, and
No, with the sand filter, the contaminants are adhered to
they're trapped in the sand.
they're trapped in the sand, and it becomes a maintenance function.
So you have to replace the sand periodically.
Yes.
Got it.
And hence, that's why I wanted to have the sand filtration. When we have under the 110 code for water and sewer, the engineering department has jurisdiction over oil water separators and over grease traps. They go through the county engineering permitting process. So the Sussex Conservation District does not permit sand filters. So that would have to go, if you were to concur with the county engineer and say, that's a good suggestion. So that would go through the engineering department review and permitting process, at which point we would do the same thing as we do with the biggest restaurant we have in the system. It would have the same kind of maintenance schedule, which we would require on a grease trap, it would require on the big all-water separator for the biggest car wash we have in the system. So I would treat it essentially the same. No, I would treat it exactly the same, and I would review it, come up with the conditions, and we will issue a permit. There's not a question that we will not. We will issue a permit for that unit. For these units, depending on whether you place them, you can have a series of smaller ones, or you could have a larger one. But it really comes down to the design engineer and what they want, but I'd be happy to sit down with them and sort of give them my opinion where I would place them. But you asked, so that is a maintenance component which sticks with that particular recommendation if you see it fit.
Are these structures typically required when the need presents itself? For instance, and I'm not suggesting that just because you forgot to do it or didn't do it on another application, you shouldn't do it here, but across the street we have an enormous development project that occurred in the last number of years.
The county engineer will be reappearing before county council.
On that issue?
Talking about the school,
No. Development across the street.
the open, yeah.
Because there's actually in the record, Councilman, in the very old record, that being the 6-year-old record, are 2 equally conflicting reports. I had the pleasure of reading.
There is a way to do it, but we'll have to condition it.
But that's not today's subject, right, Mr. President?
Right, just your report.
Just answering the question. So go back to Councilman Riley's maintenance side. So there's a maintenance side to any filtration, whether it's an oil water separator or a filter, a sand filter. Either one of them would land in the engineering department world, but they're not specifically mentioned when you look at that section of Chapter 110. It does not speak about parking lots. It speaks about restaurants, car washes, etc., car shops, all of the ones which have these units. But let's just say you went back to the separation and say, no, we prefer that we have separators. It would still land in my world. So, but the maintenance side of the bioswale and or the ephemeral wetland is also present. So both of these are in the world of the Sussex Conservation District. So normally the Sussex Conservation District does not develop an operations plan for a facility, but they do require routine inspection, which has to be provided and paid for by the owner, whether that's the HOA, whether that's a commercial entity, or whether that's somebody else. So, but if you included a biological pre-treatment component, like both consultants agree, whichever form this takes, and as I said, I have no preference whether that's a bioswale or an ephemeral wetland, there is a maintenance component with it. And we do have, for some maintenance issues, we have security, and rather than creating, when you look at, I actually reviewed the UD study, which is very interesting for all these facilities, 180 facilities in Newcastle. A lot of them have actually maintenance agreements and management agreements. I thought this was a relatively confined issue, which could be handled in the form of security like we do any and all other performance securities in my world, in the engineering department world. So I discussed that with the district, that a security would be appropriate, and they could, give us some guidance on what would be an expected maintenance function for that particular aspect. The infiltration facility, the biological component would be in the long term, and sort of we kicked around, and President and I talked about this, so 10 years seemed to be the timeline at which point you can clearly have an established maintenance plan, and whoever the owner will be at that time will have that maintenance plan funded and well rolling and be essentially perpetual.
Will ultimately be the HOA, I would assume, right?
Ultimately, it will be back on the HOA. Now, there's one other thing, and that is the Reagan term, verify. So both parties should be strongly interested, and both reports do speak to, and so does the UD study, speak to the requirement, let's just use a different word, the advantage of having test wells and pre-development water quality. And that's one thing I want to deviate one time. I wish we had the pre-development water quality from 6 years ago, but we don't. But we should definitely establish the pre-development water quality as it exists today.
Good point.
So, and that should be in everybody's best interest. So there's no, you put a whole bunch of hydrocarbons in my groundwater versus, no, they didn't exist today from that part of the recharge area. And then again, the utility has to have easement access to that quality monitoring feature. Because,
Which utility? BPW?
yeah. I mean, they're the ones who will want to see, they want to be able to test in the future and say, hey, now the infiltration facility has been running for 2 years. Let's pull another set of samples and compare them, right? So it does not make any sense to put the test wells in today, do the pre-development quality, and then pull them out. That makes no sense.
Yeah. So this constitutes a plan that, should we run this by Lewis and then the applicant, see if they agree, or is this just?
Well, the public, yes, this can be discussed, this would be discussed, you can make motions, but at this point, the public hearing is over.
So this is what we're offering if you
Yeah,
want.
this is what we're trying to
You're not
do.
going to get a reply on this from the applicant and
No, sir.
BPW?
That is based on their reports. At this point, the record is closed.
That doesn't make me real comfortable.
Keep on, sir.
So in summary, I bombarded you all with a lot of information. And so in summary, I tried to come up with some recommendations which you could holistically or individually consider. And the first one is really structured for the quantity. And the others are quality related. And some of them are quality related to the rooftop side, and some of them quality related to the side of the paved areas contributing to the runoff. Now, the one item, and I want to put it out there, the county engineer did not forget to read about the use of salt in the preparation of parking lots. So I wrestled with that quite a bit, and it is very difficult. Salt, as you can imagine, is a 100% volume. Sodium chloride is 100% water soluble, and it is essentially almost no. There are ways to take it out. Obviously, we all know about desalination, but we're not going to have a desalination plant. So, and I cannot sit here with due to the speed in the parking lot, I did not feel we could superimpose on any applicant not to use salt. However, common sense says we're not going to have 50-mile-an-hour traffic in the parking lot, so hopefully common sense is to use as little salt as possible.
During winter events.
During winter events. But so I couldn't come to a conclusion reading both sides. One side was silent on the salt, the other side said, hey, consider de-icing, i.e. salt. So, but I felt that the level of importance, given the speed, hopefully common sense says, let's use, salt if necessary just on the walkways, so no slips and falls. But it got way too complicated because of the treatment level of complexity and because of we're dealing with not a road, we're dealing with a parking lot. So it is a concern. We are in Lewis. Remember, we're close to the ocean. Saltwater intrusion is a problem. So I'm not trying to diminish this, but I also want to put it out there. Now, I read about it, and I could not come to a conclusion where I would feel comfortable putting something on paper saying X.
Does halite break down any faster than salt? I mean, is there any advantage to
I
something?
mean, like, the obvious solution would be to use sand and sweep it up when you're done.
There you go.
Okay.
So, having said this, the other one was the wetland or the bioswale. I said the engineer does not have any preference. The security through the conservation district, that's just to establish the 10-year baseline of the maintenance. The other one is the monitoring and the analysis of the monitoring based on what I feel are the critical components of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which deal directly with petroleum products, so and coolants and inorganic and organic chemicals. The other one is I did fall strongly on the side of the first flush filtration versus the design storm separation. So I do make a recommendation of this. And seven is just sort of an outgrowth of 6, because if you do think the county engineer is correct, then we'll just land in our world for permitting. So that's. So back to you, Mr. President.
I'm just, thank you for doing all this and coming up with what you think are recommendations or thoughts or whatever. And now we need to think about it and stew on it, and whatever case may be. And then at some point in time, put the 3 things back on the agenda and see if anybody wants to make any proposed whatever. Mr. Schaefer.
Do you think all of these seven items are absolutely required?
The answer is yes, and that's why I talked about the salt. So, I wanted you to get a level of comfort that I did not just say this is a shotgun approach, we're going to put everything in there. No. I do believe, after some careful consideration, the salting and the icing is not an issue which can be solved by the county engineer, and that's why I did not put anything in writing.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, I think it would be appropriate because this discussion, you wanted it in the public so all the council could hear at the same time, but also the applicant and BPW and any other member of the public should be able to get a copy of the report that was given so they'd have it. I did have one question for Mr. Medlars, and it wasn't asked, although it was discussed about budget. There were 2.
Jamie, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There were, a list of things, and at one point we mentioned budget, but that budget was gallons, and water budget. I mean, is there some kind of budget that you would anticipate on this?
I have a personal idea what the costs are.
Take a wild guess.
Pardon me?
Take a wild guess.
Before I give you a wild guess, I'd like to say that some of these are already partial requirements. Like, for example, whether you do, both say you have to have a biological component. So I give you a number for a bioswale, right? It's already in the budget. So what you're really asking, I trust, is the above and beyond budget. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Oh. So when you look at and in my opinion, probably to post the security is a cost of a financial instrument, which was not anticipated. But that's in the 1%, 2%, 3% range. It's not you're not paying for the maintenance. You're only posting a security that the maintenance is paid for. Now, for example, if you had not read your own consultant's report, I'm speaking of the applicant in this case, and did not anticipate any pre-water quality testing, you're probably looking at several $1,000s in water quality testing. But I mean, pardon me?
Annually.
No, this is, you remember, you're establishing the pre-quality. The utility will decide if they have access to the wells, and if the wells are there, they will then come up with a testing routine which fits into in their protection of their critical asset. And that
Are
is,
they going to pay for that?
I would say they would pay for that based on what they believe the critical asset needs to be tested for. And I would say after you see it after 2 and 4 and 6 years, let's say 3 rounds of testing, and you see no deviation in the baseline, the comfort level is going to be much, much higher. And maybe they say, oh, maybe we should do annual testing for the first 2 years and then go to biannual. But that's a decision which is made by the utility. But we have to give them, A, the baseline, and B, we have to give them the ability to do the testing, i.e. access and wells. I think we owe them that.
I think
That's the county engineer's
probably the
opinion.
easiest thing to do, give them access.
Okay, thank you. I assume you gave copies to both parties or whatever, somebody got them? Okay, that's cool. Thank you very much, Hans, and we'll all have to take this back and read it and look at it and whatever, but good comments. Grant request, Ms. Jennings.
Thank you.